Well, I think that, when you're in a weak position, as the indigenous people were, and when you're in a subservient location or a location in the social structure, as some of these artists were, you don't have the freedom to create the whole program of architecture, but you do have the freedom to slip things in, to pick and choose. So I think whether they appear to be random, that is, one here, one over there, one in another location, that to me doesn't weaken the case at all, that these things were done intentionally. Because, when you're playing the trickster sometimes, or when you have to be the bricoleur, when you have to hide in part what you're doing, you can't come up with a grand plan, the blueprint. But you can leave your footprint and your imprint in the blueprint. And it seems to me that it's not a matter so much of being random as a matter of just appreciating the locations that were chosen. And I've seen some of these. And I know they're absolutely at some corners and some very important locations. So I would also say the randomness may be a positive thing because it allows us to think. It allows us to imagine what these creators of these new foundations were really up to. And that ties us to them, I think, in a way that we can be respectful and raise questions. I think that what you have to do is to realize that in Mexico and other places, everybody got transformed. Mexico eventually broke away from Spain because after a while the Mexicans said, we're not really Spanish anymore. Now what was it that changed them? What changed them was their involvement with indigenous people. So the Spaniards come to be transformed just as the indigenous people are transformed. Christianity in Mexico is not the same. Catholicism in Mexico is not the same as Catholicism in Italy or Catholicism in Czechoslovakia. Things happen there. I like the way, since you're dealing with embedded stones, I like what Elizabeth Wilder Weissman says in a book called Mexico in Sculpture from 1510 to 1810. She says, in Mexico, two different kinds of life came together and created things new and different from anything else in the world. And so it's very important to understand how transformative Mexico is of Europe, as well as how transformative Europe was of indigenous people. For instance, let's take the question of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The Virgin of Guadalupe is a perfect example where indigenous people changed the Virgin Mary. And the Spanish priests who saw the situation participated in the change of the Virgin Mary into the Virgin of Guadalupe, who is, he looks indigenous and speaks Nahuatl and so forth. So while the Mexicans and the indigenous people become Catholic, they change that Catholicism. And so it's very important to look at it that way. Another way of answering your question in religious terms is in this notion of the devil. When the Europeans arrive, when the Spaniards arrive, they have already recently been through a process of trying to purify their society, of the Muslims and the Jews. The Muslims are pushed out of Spain officially just about the time that Columbus discovers the New World. The Jews are pushed out of Spain about the same time. And what happens in Spain is that they develop these dances called the Christians and the Moors. And the Moors are seen very much like the devil. They're seen as threats to Christianity. They're seen as unclean. They're seen as people who have to be converted, who in a struggle with the Christians will be transformed. This kind of dance comes to Mexico. Only now the Moors become the Indians. And the Indians often play the Moors in these dances. And what happens is that when the indigenous people see that they are being named the devil, or they're being named Judas, well, to some extent they accept it and say, well, if we're going to be the devil and if we're going to be Judas, we understand the Christian story needed Judas. Jesus couldn't be crucified or resurrected without Judas. Judas is the brother of Jesus. And they say, well, since these people are going to call us this and treat us this way, well, one of our approaches is to embed our own mythology into the story. Our mythology is that Anything meaningful in a religious terms has to be done with twins. So Jesus and Judas are the twins. And now Judas is the one who is crucial to Jesus' transformation. So this notion of embedding, of slipping in, of using your own indigenous ideas to create a new foundation. It seems to me it goes all the way from the stones to the dances of the Christians and the Moors. That is, it's a process of cultural change that I think is reflected in the way these stones were hidden, located, and built into the New World. No, I think that what's really interesting about the embedded stones is that you have a chance, when you look at the research on embedded stones, to think about the cultural process known as transculturation. And transculturation is very important at looking at what we now see was taking place from almost the very first moment of contact between Europeans and indigenous people. Transculturation takes place in what is called the contact zones, and that is when different cultures meet each other. What anthropologists and others have found is that they don't just get to know each other and become friends, or they don't just get to know each other and kill each other. They begin to have to struggle with one another for how their different stories of creation, how their ritual practices, how their naming processes, how their food is going to interact, how it's going to become part of a new world. Now, in a contact zone, when these different cultures meet, there's always a unevenness about the power relations. There's an asymmetry in the power relations, and so it was in Mexico. But what happens in these transculturation processes is that people are always picking and choosing elements of their previous culture, but they're also picking and choosing elements of the new culture that's come in the construction of their buildings, of their religion, of their society. And I think that in the embedded stones, you have an example of this, transculturation, where people are picking and choosing from a position of weakness. I mean, they're not filling the base of these buildings with these embedded stones, but they're making choices and putting them at the corners. They're putting them in very important locations, as though to say, we have picked and we've chosen a way to construct the new foundation of the colonial society. And the new foundation, we say, has some of our culture in it. Even though I, as a sculptor, may have become a Christian, I know from my physiognomy, from my stories of my family, from the very landscape that I come from, that my real foundation includes the barrel cactus stone. It includes images and structures that have come from the pre-Columbian world. So it seems to me that what you have here is a process of people creating a new world from the foundation all the way up to the Christos de Caña that says, we are many things. We are here, and we are both people of the land and people from Europe who've come here.